is here.
Hello and welcome to the All Good Stories podcast, where we believe all good stories belong to Jesus. And when we look for Jesus in the stories around us, we find him more fully in our own. We're your hosts, Chris Bowden
and Simon Campbell, two millennial dads who love pop culture and making connections from the content we love to the God who loves us.
And in episode 4, we're jumping into our first TV series together, Percy Jackson and the Olympians. So let's hold fast and brave the storm as we dive into the good stories in Percy Jackson, Part 1. So Simon, welcome to our very first TV series. We have officially arrived. We are going beyond the realm of movies, expanding our palettes a little bit. So as we jump into Percy Jackson and the Olympians, we're going to be covering in this episode, episodes 1 through 3. And in part 2, coming up next, we'll be working through the rest of the series here together.
Yeah, and I'm really excited. I think this is a great series, a great story. And essentially what's going on in this series, it's another one of those alternate worlds underneath the regular world that we live. It's a contemporary set story following a teenage boy who discovers that he is a half-blood. He's half god and half human. And the half-god part is a reference to the Greek gods, who are not myths, but they are reality, and they still live and walk among people. Yeah. And so we have a story filled with gods and monsters and myths coming to life and set into a modern context in a way that's also kind of a coming-of-age story and just a really good alternate reality kind of movie. And so this follows the hero, the central character, Percy Jackson, and a trio of friends as they take on a quest to save the world from impending conflict between the gods.
What a setup. Speaking of a coming-of-age movie, Simon, I know that this was a coming-of-age book for you. Kind of landed around the same time as Harry Potter, talking about alternative worlds on top of the normal world. We had the wizarding world, but then we also have this Percy Jackson world that entered around the same time. And this was a pretty substantial book series first for you. Tell us a little bit more about the experience of Percy Jackson for you when you first encountered it.
Yeah, so for me, Percy Jackson fit into a post-Harry Potter void of trying to find the next good story to read. I love the fantasy genre. And I think a lot of people at the time thought that Percy Jackson was going to be kind of the successor to Harry Potter, and they had a movie deal fairly quickly after that and all that kind of stuff, but it didn't turn out that way.
which also means that you, as a fan of Percy Jackson, got to experience not only the joy of the book, but also the pain that can come with being a fan of a book series and arriving at the Percy Jackson and the Lightning Thief movie released in about the mid-2000s as well.
It was, I will say, that's one of the few times I can remember just walking out of the movie theater.
Commit.
I did. It was one of the, I can't make it through this. And Rick Riordan, the author, when he talks about that experience, he's like, it was like watching my life's work go through a meat grinder. So, that's just like, I think that's a direct quote.
Yeah, so
this series has something of a redemption arc, I think, for this story and kind of giving people access to something that I do think is a good story that we've just sort of been missing out on for a while.
That's good. And to contrast that, I have never been exposed to anything Percy Jackson ever. Was a big Harry Potter kid in that era myself. I don't know what I moved on to after that, but it wasn't Percy Jackson. It just missed my sphere of influence. And so what's fun for us in here is that you're coming in with kind of a wealth of knowledge of both the books and pain of the movie that came before, whereas I am going in blind to this TV series, really not having any context of what it's about.
Well, you're in for a treat. I know it's been really fun to go through these first episodes and kind of see the differences. I think it fits a TV series really, really well.
Let's talk a little bit about like what makes this such a good story. And I think one for me that is a little bit of movie magic that's tied into some storytelling here, first and foremost, was how clearly, to me as a viewer, it felt like they were building something that had an homage to a book. It's probably one of the first TV shows or movies I watched where it was, we're giving you this story that's building, and it's like there's a little mini story told in a chapter that then has a legitimate break. We go to a black screen, we get a pause, and it seems like we move on to another scene. I think there were a few moments where that felt abrupt and a little awkward to me, but in real time it made me think, I wonder if this happens to align with the same pacing or rhythm as these books do, which was just super cool for me to think about in real time as I watched.
I think that you're sensing that exactly because, watching the first couple episodes, even the opening dialogue when we have Percy Jackson's voice of like, if you think you're a half-blood, just stop. I think that that's how the book starts. Just stop reading. If you think this is you, just go back to being ignorant. So it was kind of
so cool.
It's kind of a direct connection into how the story is set up. And even the episode titles are in line with some of the book chapter titles. It's like when I set my algebra class on fire or something like that. It's like is how the the book chapters start, and that's how they've named the episodes as well. So you can just kind of see that, the author's hands are on this a little bit more, and there are some really close ties to the feel that this is a kind of episodal book that you're watching. I think for me, when I'm looking at the quality of the story that's being told here, I think that the whole mood really fits the audience well. Because if you go to the library and pick up one of these books, it's in the youth fiction section. So it's still kind of in the upper elementary, early young adult. And so the mood and sort of the maturity of this show is a really good match for that. And I think they bring in some levity and sort of sarcasm with the characters and stuff like that.
In the most recent Harry Potter movies got darker and darker and darker as they went along. Yep. And it's fun to kind of arrive back at the start of a story where there's such levity and childhood humor that's incorporated in this. That's just fun and accessible and cute enough, but still fun for us to watch, but definitely in the demo for the 12-year-olds out there who are going to be reading the book now. One theme that I just liked that ran throughout from the very beginning has just been the whole water element. I mean, it felt a little obvious. Maybe they threw a trident in the logo, which I think is like honoring to the book's logo as well. But the whole idea that there is a water theme, whether that's from a bathroom toilet exploding or whether that's from, it's raining again. We're in the rain again. There's a fountain outside the museum. There's all these different hints and pulls that like, Poseidon's going to be his dad, isn't it?
Yeah.
Definitely the water dude.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. We got it. But I just love the creative incorporation of that, whether it was in the environment itself, whether some settings and the set pieces themselves was just super neat. And then the reality, which I'm sure is in the book too, you can, correct me here if not, but the reality of when he gets chosen by Poseidon.
Yeah. It's a big deal.
He is, no one else has, because apparently that's not a thing you can do. Yeah. And of course he's the only kid who's in that little cabin, and it looks abandoned. And I was like, that was a little chef's kiss for me. That is how that would actually go. If you talk about being a forbidden child, right? And then it wouldn't have made any sense if we didn't have to populate this with all these like other kids. Because now I assume he's going to have to navigate maybe some sense of loneliness or navigate like, I am the only one here in this now. And good setup to kind of that whole theme of it all.
That's why I think it fits a TV series better, is because you're kind of discovering these things along with Percy. That was one of the downfalls of the first movie, is that it just didn't do a good job establishing the world that the story was set in. And it just felt trite, and it just felt shallow in comparison to the world that was built as a part of this story. And there are certain things that is just, they're so clever by the author. The reason behind the forbidden children, for instance, the big three gods decided not to spawn any more children was because of World War II. And that was a clash between the sons of Hades and Zeus and Poseidon because of the rivalry between them, which just kind of roots it even more in the real world and makes the story come to life in a different way. So like there are lots of things like that that just fit the TV series format, where you don't have to be so rushed in kind of revealing more aspects of this world that's being built.
Anytime that I'm taking in content that connects the history we actually have in the world with some new element of fantasy that is able to be layered in a really fun, creative way, it's just like my favorite kind of content. Anytime an author can pull on some threads and themes or secret whys behind stuff in history too is just really, really cool to take something as, what could be like boring to an 8th grader as a Greek mythology and go, but have you thought of something like this?
Because he does that so well, I think it gives us a chance to wrestle with the real human questions that the original myths captivated so well. Because we get to wrestle with these questions of human suffering and whether the gods care about our fate, or like the role of fate and prophecy and our path forward and our relationship with higher powers, and all those types of things are wrapped up in stories like this. And because they're layered on something that is a part of history, I think it just taps into those human questions and those human longings even more.
So Simon, we're feeling like it's a pretty good story so far.
Oh yeah.
All your childhood
I knew that
aside.
already though. I knew that.
So, as the guy who's seen it and says, oh yeah, it's good, and the
It's
guy
good.
who knows nothing, we're tracking in the right direction.
It's good. We'll keep the episode going because we already know. It's good.
All right, so great that we're tracking with a good story here. But in all of these, we believe that these are a great opportunity to connect to Jesus. We think Jesus is hiding in every great story. So, Simon, what's the first thing that jumps off the page to you in this story that you just get to see Jesus on display through?
One of the things that I think belongs to Jesus is wrestling with the question of feeling distance from God. There's this one section when Percy's mom is explaining his origins to him, and then she's talking about when she met Percy's father, Poseidon. She's like, and then I realized he was unlike any man I had ever met before, because he wasn't a man at all. He was a god. You fell in love with God? Like Jesus? He's like, not, and she's like, not God, a god. Percy, and then talks about the Greek gods and all that stuff.
Yeah,
but I
good
just
one
thought
word
it was
nuance there.
Yeah, that was such a good piece of dialogue that they wrote into the show that I was just like, oh, that's so good. I think that the distance that Percy feels between his father, who is the god Poseidon, because he doesn't know about him, because he's not been around, he's immersing himself in this camp and kind of waiting to be claimed and all this kind of stuff. This distance, I think that that's something that belongs to the story of Jesus, because we know that is kind of the default state of humanity. We feel far from God. We are born into a broken world. We are born into a broken relationship with God. And so it's really easy for us to feel like, I hear the stories in the Bible, but God feels far from me. This doesn't feel real. And Percy, in this conversation with his mom, is having a hard time coming to grips with this being his reality and saying, no, there's just something wrong with my mind. I have the, ADHD and dyslexia. That's a much more logical explanation for who I am. And I think for us engaging the story of Jesus, it is hard to get our minds around that a story so big could be real, and that the God of the universe, who initially feels so far, so out of reach, but in reality is close to us and wants to be near to us and wants to have a relationship with us.
Yeah, that's really good. And you see the wrestle as it plays from the moment that he kind of learns about this truth. He's kind of got to go back and reassess, go figure. But I think what's really interesting in this is that it makes way more sense for him to have some other reason, logic, or direction here. And the same time that I feel like a lot of us do as people who follow Jesus, we think that gift is either too good or it's hard to believe. And so I feel like I got to earn my way. I got to do the thing. I got to check the boxes. I got to make sure I'm good with God, right? Am I doing all the right things? And the message of Jesus is like, my grace is sufficient for you. You don't have to earn your way. And I really love the contrast and tension this creates for Percy in the story, in the sense that he absolutely has to earn it in this story.
Yes,
because
that's a really good point.
he jumps into camp and very quickly
Which is a totally, like, you know, when you look at what camp is, that's an establishment of a religious system. You do these certain things, you get glory. You make sacrifices, you please your godly parent, and you will be favored, right?
That is exactly right. So going in and saying, hey, I have to win, capture the flag in order for my
dad to notice me.
My God of a father to even talk to me, to pick up the phone, right? And instead, we got access to that all the time, right? Like, if I believe in Jesus, I have got a connection. I've got the Holy Spirit. I can pray anytime and be connected to God. It makes me go, oh, what a gift. Where if I'm talking to my kids or watching someday and going like, man, that seems really hard, doesn't it? What a lot of effort. And God isn't like that in our lives. He's present. He's always around. He's always listening. He loves you unconditionally. He cares about you.
The contrast between the religious system of trying to earn favor with God, and in Percy's case, and other heroes' case, earn favor with their godly parent, that is something that contrasts with the story of Jesus. We don't see, in order to be called a son of God, you have to do, X, Y, Z. It's, I've done that for you. I've created a place for you. You step into my invitation, rather than trying to earn favor or earn the attention or even earn the right to be claimed. That's a contrast that belongs to Jesus, and I think that that's an opportunity in the story to really tap into what the gospel story is.
Which brings me to one thing that I thought was really cool and belongs to Jesus was this whole new world that Percy is thrust into as soon as he learns the truth of the story. His mom
mist
tells him
is revealed.
The
mist
that's
falls
right.
back. He starts to see things clearly. Yeah, you're so right.
He gets the truth of the story from his mom. She tells him what's up in the same way that at some point we heard the gospel as believers of Jesus, and it changed everything.
It's almost like the mist is like a spiritual blindness. The way that the mist is described in this series is that it shrouds the view of mortals from seeing the real world around them. So they don't see these Greek monsters. They don't see the Greek gods. But when Percy's eyes are opened because he realizes who he is, he realizes that these stories are true, he can now see a completely different world and see things more clearly than he ever has before.
And that's what the mist does. Dead before believing in Jesus. Who'd have thought? Which I love connects back even to our previous podcast episode where you get this dynamic of Doctor Strange of like, there's this whole other world that happens in the multiverse or the mirror dimension, right? We're just playing on more things that people can't see because they don't believe in the spiritual realm.
No eye has seen, no ear has heard what God has prepared for those who love and trust him. Like, those are the things that, for me, it's such a connection. And I love that when they talk about it, I think later in one of the later episodes, they're riding in the train or whatever, and he looks out the window and he sees a galloping group of centaurs, and there's other mortals on the train. Like, how are they not seeing this?
Spoiler, I think that's episode 4, but
whoopsies.
Yep.
But I think that's how mortals explain what they're seeing. And I think there's a line that Grover says, it's just like, it's amazing how much mortals will just see what they want to see. And I think that that's such a great way to talk about how before we come to know Jesus, before we embrace that story about ourselves and embrace that identity, we live in a state of spiritual blindness where we just kind of see what we want to see. We're immersed in the things of daily life, and we don't see the signs. We don't see the wonders. We don't see the things that God is doing in our lives. And it's only until after we embrace that relationship with him that we begin to see the world clearly and all that he has done for us.
Yeah.
It's so good.
Like most of these heroes' journeys, right, you get both the beauty and the burden simultaneously with all of it, which again just draws back into that Christian life that we live. I feel like that's a good recurring theme. It's like, you get the beauty of it all while coming to face with all the brokenness that kind of comes with it, and all these beautiful things that Jesus gets to reconcile and build with you along the way.
One of the things that I also think belongs to Jesus and belongs to the story of Jesus is this character that we only glimpse, but will become important to the story later. I'll try not to spoil anything, but the guy with the scythe that's got the
spooky man in the dark.
Spooky man in the dark
cool.
with raspy
The first time I was like, it's the ghost of Christmas yet to come. Yeah, nice.
He definitely gives that kind of vibe. He just needs that weird finger point.
Percy Jackson.
Yeah, but like that voice, that character, I think really fits the accuser and does absolutely play that role of the tempter and the accuser of the gods, and kind of tries to, as we'll see later, influence Percy. And I think even in the first couple episodes, we hear him, he's accusing Poseidon, his father. He left you here with nothing. I know how you feel. You want what's been taken from you, when he's talking about losing his mom. You want justice. And I think that we do face a supernatural enemy in the life of a Christian, and embracing the story of Jesus. We do face a supernatural enemy, and his primary power against us is that accusation, tapping into our desires and twisting them for his purposes, and twisting them for the purpose of rebelling against God and his plans for us. And so I think that, as we'll see in this series, this character starts to loom larger and larger, and becomes a turning point or a choice for Percy in terms of what he's going to do.
Wow, leave us with the intrigue, Simon. The last one for me of where I think this story really draws some clear ties to our journey with Jesus is a quote from Annabeth in episode 2, who looks at Percy and says, "You still don't get where you fit into this yet, do you?" She's got a bit of the understanding of the world. She's a confident character. Percy definitely isn't, for one reason or another. He's figuring all this out. He's scared. He doesn't know what to expect. And so then later in episode 3, this theme returns where it's, why are you so afraid of who you are? And I'm not afraid. Yes, you are. You say that you're just a kid, but they don't do the things that you do. There's this realization of, like, there's so much more to you than you even know or realize. And I think that's
still wrestling with that identity, right? Wrestling with whether or not he's going to embrace this new identity. Yeah.
That's exactly right. We all have so much more potential than we often realize. We all have these voices in our head. We've got these lies, whether, like you said, we've got a spiritual enemy that would love to just get in the way of what it is that God's really calling us and asking us to do, that he's empowered us to do. I think in each of our lives, we have the opportunity to be, quote, more than just a kid in the way that we engage in God's mission in the world, because no one else in the world is able to do the things that we do when we're connected to Jesus. There's nothing like the movement of God in the world. My favorite part of this was something Annabeth said shortly after that was, you are a part of something bigger than we understand. We have to move forward whether you want to or not. And I think that's just another element in our relationship with Jesus, or where I see Jesus in this story, is that we are a part of something so much bigger than we can ever understand. We are such a small yet meaningful puzzle piece in what God is doing in the world. And there are times where it's like, we have to move forward whether you want to or not, whether you believe it yet or not, whether you're confident about it yet or not. I just love seeing that in a character's development.
And I think that we all need those Annabeths in our life as a Christian. I think that everybody needs that nudge from somebody who's been in it longer, who's been following Jesus longer, who knows the stories better, all that kind of stuff, to kind of push us forward as we go on. So I think that's a great one. One of the other things I think belongs to Jesus in here is this idea of Percy not being broken, but being singular. It's a very interesting choice of words there. When Percy's mom is saying goodbye to him right before he goes to camp, she says, "You are singular. You are a miracle. You are my son. Hold fast and brave the storm." And I was intrigued by that use of the word singular. But I think that it's a good word, and I think that this is a place where that moment belongs to Jesus. I mean, I think if you swap out Jesus's voice for Percy's mother in that moment, Percy is a 12-year-old boy who doesn't know what is going on. He thinks he's just becoming aware of himself, and he thinks he's so messed up. He thinks he's so broken. But to hear the voice of his mother, and I think, for us, the voice of Jesus speaking into us, you are not broken. You are singular. Another way of saying you are unique. You are beautiful. You are one of a kind. And you are my son. So hold fast, brave the storm, and know that I love you. And I think that all of us at some point need to hear those words from Jesus. And I think that when you look into the stories of Jesus, you see that. You see that through his actions on the cross. You see that in his message to his disciples as he's about to ascend into heaven. And know that I'm with you always, even to the end of the age. Words from the Psalms, I've knit you together in your mother's womb. I know you. You are fearfully and wonderfully made. All of us at some point in our lives need to hear those words. You are not broken, you are singular. It kind of comes to a full fruition when he gets claimed at camp, and Chiron echoes the same thing. He says, You are son of Poseidon, earth shaker, son of the sea god, and you are singular among heroes. So while I puzzled at first a little bit about the choice of words there, I think it's a powerful one. I think it's an opportunity.
Okay, these are great themes of where we get to see Jesus on display in Percy Jackson, episodes 1 through 3. But, so what? It's my favorite question. Like, this is great. That conversation's fun. So what, Simon?
I think if we give this story to Jesus, really, if we give Percy Jackson and the Olympians to Jesus, I think it gives us an opportunity to talk about some themes in a really practical way. Because I think this is so well geared towards a adolescent, emerging adult audience, I think that you have a really great opportunity to talk about wrestling with identity. As I'm thinking about early teenagers or middle schoolers that are watching this or reading these books and kind of getting into these stories afresh because of the TV series, I think this gives us an opportunity to talk about wrestling with identity, whether he's going to embrace his identity as a half-blood and as a son of Poseidon, or whether he's going to kind of resist it. There's a part in the series where he says, "No, I'm Sally Jackson's son." He's wrestling with whether or not he's going to embrace this world, whether he's even going to take this quest. And I think that those are the types of things, like as he's discovering who he is as a part of this bigger story, and you have teenagers who may or may not be grasping the size of the story of the gospel or embracing it fully in their lives. I think that this is a really great opportunity and a story that gives us a chance to talk about that wrestling, to talk about that conflict within ourselves, for sure.
I think another really important theme that we can walk away from this is the value and necessity of being seen. You see from Percy's mom that she sees him for who he is in his identity. He gets seen by people later on for who he is and what he can actually bring to the table. And you see that contrasted with who he is in a school setting before that. And then once he enters into this world, he's got a dad where he's got to earn his way to being seen, and realizes that he has not been seen and been ignored by a father figure his whole life. And when I think about people understanding and knowing that there's a God of the universe that sees them and loves them and knows them no matter what, if there's one thing we can walk away with kind of instilling and saying, I want to help my daughter know that she's seen by me.
Yeah.
She's seen by God in the same way, because she's going to see me see her first.
Yep.
And she's going to be able to see later all the ways in which God is much, much better than me. But I think it starts with us and our families and relationships, whether that's with a neighbor or whether that's with a coworker, whether that's with our kids, seeing people for who God's uniquely wired in them and designed them to be, and saying, you're not broken. You're in a broken world. There may be some parts of you that feel like they're broken, or you feel like you need to be reconciled. And that may be true, but God loves you unconditionally. And the more we can help people see that, I think there's just so many clear ties here that make me emotional when I think about it.
We see a kid who's gone through being expelled multiple times from school. All these things happen to him that he can't really explain, that he's just been, kind of an outcast his whole life. But to hear that he gets claimed by his mom first. And I think that we as parents, we get to create that echo in our child's heart of what they need to hear from God through our voice first. So, 100%.
And now, welcome to Love It or Leave It, the part of the show where we list what we loved and what we could have done without along the way. Because I don't know if you know this, but ChatGPT has decided it's going to grow up a little bit and is very concerned by us writing any sort of parody that could offend Christian beliefs. They say they want to be a positive and inclusive AI, and so I can't even get a Christian parody generated.
Can't even make fun of ourselves anymore, Chris.
That's my favorite thing to do. So, without any further ado, let's love it or leave it.
So here's my question for you. Love it or leave it, the consensus song.
Oh, absolute leave it. That is Garbage. That is so triggering for me. Like if any 12-year-old is gonna sing that in front of their friends, I'm like bullied for years. You're gonna go out on a limb and throw that out there. But I say that because I was the kid at that age who did that, and they would be like, "You are not 6 years old. You are a weirdo." Like, so that's just my own like baggage of my.
I'm disappointed.
Hard pass.
That's a love it for me. At first, I was like, oh no, is this just going to be a cringy moment? But then they used it well, and they brought it back, and the little claps.
As far as something that like they chose to keep that was probably in the books, I'm assuming. If you want to stay to that source material, great, you did it, you pulled it off, I can respect that. But maybe as a concept in general, I go, thank you.
I liked it. I'm about it.
Here's one I liked. It was a quote from the man at the museum who ends up being a centaur later. What a sentence that I get to throw into the world there. Yeah. But hands Percy his pen, which ends up being a sword. Spoiler. But he says, "Here's this pen. It's a mighty instrument." And I'm just like, chef's kiss of a sentence. That's so great because he doesn't know that it's a sword. But the phrase is still true, Yeah,
it's a good sentence for a teacher to say. As a little aside, the line that replaces in the book, I remember this because I was like, that's kind of a weird line. In the book, when the monster appears, Chiron just tosses Percy the pen and says, "What ho, Percy?" So this is a definite, I think, an upgrade from What Ho.
Yeah, that is a book for 12-year-olds. When you were reading the books as a kid, did you always picture Grover from Sesame Street every time you read the name in the book? Was that something you had to get over? Oh my word. Because that's all I could think about. It's like, if I was reading this as a kid, Sesame Street, ingrained in my childhood, like every time I would have to get over my mental association. Because what other Grover do you know in pop culture ever? Or any
that's
person.
So funny.
Right? Like, even watching the show, it took me a second to go like, Grover? His name is Grover? So
there is a monster at the end of this book.
MVP book. We need to do a whole episode on There Is a Monster at the end of this, because that is a darn good story. You turned the page.
Yeah, it's either like I feel like I do a good Grover or I morph into Yoda somehow. It just depends on the sentence.
Frank
structure.
Oz, baby, same guy. It's okay.
Is it really?
It great. Oh yeah, Yoda and Grover, same guy. Frank Oz.
Wow, that just blew my mind. Good
the
for you.
The more you know.
The one beef I have with the casting is I think that they missed an opportunity with Gabe, the stepdad.
Say more.
So at the beginning, when they're kind of showing Percy coming home from school and he meets this Gabe who's his stepdad who's kind of supposed to be this slime ball of a person.
Okay.
I didn't think he was disgusting enough. He wasn't... He looked somewhat put together, had a decent haircut. He wasn't I just imagined, and he's supposed to be just this disgusting, I imagine this grubby guy with a shaggy beard and a wife beater with a belly hanging out and a case of beer next to him. That's who I pictured, and I felt like it was a missed opportunity.
Yeah. Okay, here's my soapbox where I went, come on, was the tried and true movie TV trope of there is bad stuff going down, something's chasing us, and yet we got to talk about our moment of separation for what feels like 5 minutes, where it's emotional, he's gonna have to leave his mom, you already know, okay, she's gonna die. That's the play. Right. She's got to make the sacrifice move, right? Yep. The Minotaur is charging through the woods, right? And in this one, she's like, "You got to go without me. You can't go through the mist." And my brain, I'm like, "What's the mist? I don't know." I'm getting so many things. And non-blue Grover is screaming that, "We gotta go." The tension's high. And yet she's like, "You gotta go." "I can't." "But you gotta go." "But I can't go. I won't leave you." "No, Percy, you have to go." I'm like, the Minotaur is charging through the woods and he's killed all of you by now. I
think it would take the monster less time to get to you than this dialogue is actually
big leave it, just give me the emotional pain of being robbed of the goodbye. I feel like that carries more impact, right? Of it's got to be a quick goodbye. We don't have time for this great heartfelt goodbye, because that's not how the world works.
Okay, I'm interested in this for you as a person who's new to Percy Jackson. The magic items, the magic New York Yankees cap and the flying Converse shoes. Like, what was, is that a love it or leave it for you?
It's a love it for me. That is something I'm absolutely all in on. The idea that, again, I feel like we're just layering mythology, modern day, on top of each other. The way when we get to reinterpret some older ideas from literature or pop culture, I think is super cool. Yeah, of course the wings are like painted onto the shoe that turn into actual wings, and it plays off the idea of, oh yeah, that's the god that flies around with wings on his ankles, you know? Like, that is such a cool homage to the original idea that I think is so smart. And I think what a great way to make some of those superpowers accessible to these characters who are not gods themselves. I think that's a big love it. And it's cool because it just makes me imagine what else is out there. That my imagination gets to run in some cool directions.
So, episode 3, Medusa. Love it or leave it, the handling of the invisible head.
I love that you're presenting these as questions for me. This is great. I thought that was so well played. Like, the reality of, like, how's that actually going to work? I feel like there's so many shows and TV shows that would have, like, either glanced or taken, like, almost like the easy way out of that one. But navigating, it did feel a little clunky of, we get it, we got to move the story, go. I felt the tension of that a little bit, but I love that it was like, oh yeah, we got to find the head, and we got to hold the head. And the fact that
the sound effects on that, you don't think that was a little much?
I wish I would have had captions on, because I wish it would have said just like squelching noise, you know? I had captions on for season 4 of Stranger Things. Half of the show was just wet squelching noises in the captions. I was like, this makes it way worse.
I mean, I think the actors did as good as you can with pretending,
how fun
with
to
pretending
do, like,
that you're holding an invisible head.
That was like old school movie stuff that I loved. You gotta literally hold an invisible something. And the fact there's the detail of like, make sure the head's facing away. I was like, that's right.
Do you think that they were miming that, or do you think that they were like holding a green screen head?
Oh, I wanted to say they're miming. If they did a green screen for that, I'd be so hard pass. Like, I'd be so disappointed. I really hope they just had
it does look like a mime. It does, and
I want it to be that way for sure.
Love it or leave it, Megan Mullally as a Fury.
Megan Mullally, I thought, did a really good job. I feel like she always brings 110% to whatever it is that she's doing. So, like, if this is my role, I'm in. But for me, it was the separation of, like, this is Megan Mullally. That was the problem.
I needed a little bit more of the higher pitch, like, Will and Grace voice.
Yes!
I just needed a little bit more of the sickly sweet. That's one of the things that I feel like is classic her. And I didn't feel like we got that.
Here's my last love it or leave it, Simon.
All right.
Love it or leave it, the cameo at the end of episode 3 of Lin-Manuel Miranda.
That's a good one. Oh, this is hard for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because
what's up, Lin-Manuel fan?
Because I, in almost all cases, love Lin-Manuel Miranda.
Yeah, he's like a full send for you.
Okay, I will say, though, in the book, Hermes is described as, like, he's either a postman or he's like a jogger that never sits down, and he's like always like looks like he's been running. And Lin-Manuel Miranda does not look like he's ever been running. Like, he's just like the dude's a playwright. Maybe he can go as like the god of mischief or a god of thieves, because Hermes is that as well. Maybe even the god of travelers. But in terms of the messenger god that's always running around, I just don't buy it.
Well, Simon, all good things must come to an end, including this podcast.
Thanks for joining us for episode 4. We hope that you enjoyed our treatment of Percy Jackson and are excited to see what other things in the story belong to Jesus.
Yeah, join us for episode 5 as we dive into part 2. And we'd love to keep the conversation going with you because there's all sorts of other good stories and great nuances to explore. And you can track us down to talk about your thoughts, insight, and questions on Instagram at All Good Stories Podcast. We would love to keep the conversation going and keep learning from you.
And remember, all good stories belong to Jesus.
And if you choose to give your story to Jesus, you can be sure he'll make it a good one.